Welcome to wonderful Ecorse, Michigan, where the corruption is loud and proud, the Detroit River glistens among the islands made up of national wildlife refuges to try to help reshape the image of the area after decades of industrial pollutants, and of course, where you can stand by the Detroit River shoreline and point across the way and blurt out, "Hey, I can see Canada!" Ecorse is about a 20-minute drive southwest of downtown Detroit in an area called Downriver. It's a small suburb that's surrounded by Lincoln Park to the west, River Rouge to the north, Wyandotte to the south, and it even borders Detroit for a small part to the northwest. Where we begin the video is on the north side, while heading south on Jefferson Avenue. If you've seen my last video from this area on River Rouge, yeah, Ecorse is River Rouge's twin brother. Same crap, different day. You know, same problems to the same extent. Those problems being pollution, crime, economic decline, population decline, bad schools, high property taxes, and corruption. Well, I got something for you here today, and I'll start by saying that problems have been present here for a long time.
Got 99 problems and a housing shortage ain't one.
Dang. Well, Ecorse has been ranked as one of the worst Detroit suburbs continuously since the 1980s. Speaking of the 80s, that's when Ecorse went bankrupt. In 1986, Ecorse became the first city in Michigan to file for bankruptcy. The state then assigned a receiver to the city, that being good old boy Bud, or should I say, Louis Schimmel.
What up, Lou Shim?
That's his government name. I hear that Bud is his rap name. Yeah, he's a rapper on the side. He doesn't really want people to know about it, but yeah, his rap name is Bud. Well, to use a term that's more well known by Michiganders today, Schimmel was essentially the emergency manager of Ecorse. The term emergency manager wasn't used in Michigan until the Public Act of 1990. This document that was created by the state justified the notion of creating an emergency manager by stating that half of all jobs lost in the entire U.S. over the 1980s decade were lost in Michigan, which in return forced dozens of municipalities to suffer financial challenges. Anyway, Ecorse was the first municipality in Michigan to receive such an authority figure, and Schimmel went on to have a long career as an emergency manager for many other Michigan communities since being assigned as such for Ecorse back in 1986. So if there's a Mount Rushmore in Michigan, Lou Schimmel, or Bud, would definitely be one of the four faces. No question.
What up, Slim? Henry Ford? Stevie Wonder?
You know, maybe they can build Michigan's Mount Rushmore on Zug Island once U.S. Steel gets rid of their Michigan operations completely. Just don't put Lou Shim on there, because that would be an insult to the others. Alright, well, moving on now. Part of the reason for Ecorse going bankrupt was the loss of manufacturing jobs, along with an extreme population decline. Ecorse lost 17.5% of its population from 1970 to 1980, which is an extremely high rate of decline. The decline continued from 1980 to 1990 with a rate of 15.7%. During that time frame from 1970 to 1990, Ecorse was among the fastest declining cities in the country in terms of residential population, and I'm sure job losses too. Well, another part of the decline, according to the state of Michigan back then in a hype piece that was written for Lou Schimmel, was reckless spending, which was probably true. And look, I don't have anything against Louis Schimmel. I don't know anything about this guy, but at the same time, the article I'm reading paints him out to be the second coming of Christ.
What up, second coming of Christ?
Which is a little bit much if you ask me. Yeah, that's a little bit too much praise. It seemed like they were more so trying to justify their decision of putting him there by excessively complimenting him in this article. So really, I'm just trying to even the playing field here a little bit, because that's what I do best. However, I'm not doubting that there was some major corruption among city officials back then, because there have been numerous corruption charges against Ecorse officials in more modern times. Let's start with a case from 2003 and work our way up, shall we? Back in 2003, the corrupt quartet of council members Bobby Baker, Zadora Miller, Angela Smith, and community activist Frank Fields all faced federal charges of election fraud.
Damn!
Baker, who was 70 years old at the time, was charged with 5 counts of improper return of an absentee ballot and 3 counts of conspiracy to improperly return absentee ballots. Fields, who was 76, and Miller, 56, faced 1 count each for tampering with an absentee ballot, improper return, and conspiracy, while Smith faced 1 count of improper return and conspiracy.
Damn!
Miller faced 2 additional charges stemming from a prior 2001 election, those charges being tampering and improper return. All four of these people pled their innocence in a years-long court battle that took place throughout the entire year of 2003, but in the end, they were all found guilty of said charges. On to 2009 now, where then Ecorse Mayor Herbert Worthy, who is very unworthy of the position of mayor for the city of Ecorse, well, Worthy was being investigated for corruption in 2009. Word got out that Worthy and then city controller Erwin Hollenquist were accepting bribes from a contractor who was working for the city. After 2 years of investigations, the two were found guilty of soliciting and accepting bribes. The two cheated Ecorse taxpayers $3.1 million. Additionally, there were two other men, Sheldon Divers and Stacy Tarakoff, who were contractors for a company called Michigan Municipal Services. Those two guys saw charges for bribing the two officials while being contracted to work for the city's Public Works Department. And once they got the job for the city of Ecorse, Divers and Tarakoff then inflated their invoices for the city and offered gifts to others with Ecorse taxpayer money. Worthy acknowledged that he received more than $30,000 in cash from the two guys, while Hollenquist admitted to receiving cash and a used Lexus. Worthy then resigned after being re-elected as mayor during the 2-year investigation. So that means that Ecorse voted for this man to stay in office while being investigated for accepting bribes.
Bruh.
Alright, well now on to our third story, as back in 2020 there was some drama in the building. No surprise, because there was seemingly drama in every building in the world that year. But in November of that year, the Ecorse City Council demanded for then and still current mayor of Ecorse, Lamar Tidwell, to step down from his position and do the right thing. That's right, the city council was loud and proud, slammed their foot down on the ground, and told Mayor Tidwell that he needs to step down from his position. By the way, this all happened just one day after he was re-elected. One day! The city council stated that a 2006 Chevy Trailblazer was purchased from the mayor, who bought it in February 2017 for $500 from an Ecorse police officer. Well, apparently Mayor Tidwell didn't handle the purchase of a 2006 Chevy Trailblazer correctly. Then Public Safety Director Joseph Thomas wrote that Tidwell didn't have a valid transaction.
Your credit card has been declined. Please select a different payment method.
Councilman John Miller was quoted in the Detroit News by saying it was a violation of the city charter, a conflict of interest, and abuse of public office. Mayor Tidwell responded in a Zoom meeting by saying, "Ridiculous, ridiculous. Very ridiculous." I mean, to me it just sounds like a bunch of petty drama and nothing all that serious, really. It's a 2006 Chevy Trailblazer, for crying out loud, that he bought from a former police officer for $500. I mean, come on now, what are we talking about here? Oh, wait, okay, here we go. Yeah, okay, now it makes sense. Okay, alright, okay, so the election that Tidwell won the previous day, where Tidwell received 78% of Ecorse residents' votes, there was an ongoing investigation that the FBI called an orchestrated cover-up by the former Ecorse police chief and other police officers who worked for the city at the time. The investigation revolved around how the police department was handling stolen vehicles, with Tidwell also being a subject in that investigation. The 2006 Chevy Trailblazer that Tidwell purchased was a vehicle that had been forfeited by the Hamtramck Police Department in February of 2016. Now, both Hamtramck and Ecorse were members of the now-defunct Cobra Task Force, which included multiple jurisdictions and focused on auto thefts. The task force came to an end in 2017 when Detroit police officials complained that Ecorse and Highland Park were improperly processing their stolen vehicles. We'll get back to things in a bit, as right now we're easily in the nicest part of Ecorse. One thing that I have to give the city credit for is how they've made a really nice park area available along the riverfront. The homes along Jefferson Avenue on the opposite side of the river add a nice small-town charm to a city that's otherwise full of industrial zoning and blighted buildings. Pretty riverfront though. Not bad. Nice little park area to complement the waterfront. Gotta give him that. So back to the story now, as essentially Mayor Tidwell was not only driving around in a stolen 2006 Chevy Trailblazer while claiming that he bought it for $500 from an Ecorse police officer, but he also sold it. Yet, there was no record of payment for the vehicle. Mayor Tidwell gave riding dirty a whole new meaning.
Damn.
While the police officer that sold it to him was Kevin Barkman. Barkman was also investigated by the FBI with allegations stating that false statements were made by Ecorse officers about a 2014 F-150 that was stolen from Chesterfield Township back in 2016. Chesterfield Township is another Detroit suburb about 45 minutes northeast of Ecorse. The problem, however, was that Barkman was spotted driving the stolen Ford F-150 from Chesterfield.
Bruh.
More corruption cases in a bit because there are more things to talk about there, but you can't make a video on Ecorse and not talk about the steel industry, and right now we're passing by some property that used to be owned by Great Lakes Works. U.S. Steel owns Great Lakes Works, and there's still a large facility in Ecorse along the Detroit River on the north end of town. U.S. Steel also owns the blast furnaces on Zug Island that I talked about in my River Rouge video, and I'll show you the Ecorse facility off of One Quality Drive in just a few minutes. Regardless, the steel mill that used to stand here was vacant for 30 years before demolition started back in 2005. Since then, it's been an empty brownfield and nothing has been done with it, so for 50 years, this large piece of property in Ecorse has been unused. The large Mill Street plant was first called Michigan Steel, founded by George Fink, who came from Pennsylvania. Production started on July 5, 1923, and it had huge success right away, as it was in a great location along the Detroit River with access to railroads connecting it to other large population centers like Chicago and Cleveland. In 1929, the Great Lakes Steel Corporation formed, and the new corporation acquired the blast furnaces on Zug Island that were priorly operated by a company called Hanna Furnace. The Mill Street plant was huge during World War II in supplying armor plates. The plant also produced nose hangers, barracks, steel for powder magazines, and camouflage frames for guns. The Mill Street plant was one of a half dozen or so really large plants in the Detroit area that helped manufacture supplies for the U.S. during World War II. Detroit and other Rust Belt metropolises were crucial for the country's defense during that time. Here's just what the residential area that borders the old steel mill looks like. We'll fast forward now to demolition, and plans in 2004 called for demolishing the empty structure to put in 300 new waterfront condos. And yeah, that never happened. Since 2004, smartphones have been placed in everybody's hands. Tom Brady was just getting started on his run for 7 Super Bowl rings. The Red Wings were still good. The Pistons were the best team in basketball.
What up, Chauncey Billups?
A far cry from where they are now. MySpace was the #1 social media platform.
What up, MySpace Tom?
Facebook and Twitter hadn't even started yet. Heck, YouTube wasn't even around until a year later. Regardless, point is that nothing has been done with this property in 20 years. Plans were announced by the city of Ecorse, however, starting in October of 2020, that real estate developers had proposed a mixed-use development on the site. I'm assuming that environmental cleanup still has a long way to go before anything can get done here, but Ecorse was able to collect a $100,000 grant from Michigan Site Readiness along with other efforts to try to make it a suitable property for residents or businesses. Hopefully something can get done here, because just east of this property is the area along the Detroit River that I showed you not that long ago that looks like it has potential to be at least something decent, right? And I haven't been able to find any drawings online of any official plans for this site, but there are plenty of articles stating that there's been some efforts here and there to get something developed. Ecorse needs it too, as the population decline continues to be in full effect, so an investment to redevelop this property would be a great thing for this city. Here's the steel mill off of One Quality Drive. Right behind it is the Detroit River. A Detroit News article from 2023 stated that the Ecorse facility still has 630 employees, but that's a far cry from the thousands of workers who used to be employed across all of the Great Lakes Works facilities throughout Ecorse and River Rouge. I know Zug Island used to have 16,000 workers, not including other facilities. I couldn't find the exact count on this, but it's clear that there's not near as many employees that work here that used to. And the steel that's produced here today is mainly used in the auto industry, to nobody's surprise, as there's still a large automotive economy in Metro Detroit. Well, back to corruption charges, as unfortunately there's more to talk about here. The last case that I mentioned was how Mayor Tidwell was being accused of buying a vehicle with improper documentation.
Your credit card has been declined. Please select a different payment method.
And how the police officers had overall questionable handling of stolen vehicles. That was all in 2020 as well. Well, fast forward now to 2021, and Public Safety Director Joseph Thomas was voted out by the City Council. Even though he was seemingly the lead man on calling out the mayor for buying the vehicle on a council that overall wanted Tidwell to step down. Additionally, the council voted to pay $300,000 to 2 other employees for dropping their complaints against the city. Those 2 people being former Public Safety Director Michael Moore and Deputy Public Safety Director Narda Bruno. Moore then became part-time fire chief and consultant after being fired as Public Safety Director 7 months prior after an FBI member accused Moore of engaging in an orchestrated cover-up over the handling of stolen vehicles. Moore had a pending wrongful termination lawsuit against the city of Ecorse that he dropped among the settlement. Bruno, on the other hand, dropped a discrimination charge that she filed against the city. Yeah, Bruno was ready to send Ecorse to Mars. But she had other plans once she got her $300,000. Lastly, corruption was present in Ecorse all the way back in 1974 as well. The New York Times stated that on December 12, 1974, the chief of police, the superintendent of public works, and 3 other top police officials were arrested for protecting a gambling ring that earned $5 million a year in return for payoffs of up to $2,000 a month. That sounds like some Al Capone kind of stuff that I've talked about in some of my South Chicago suburb videos. Seems like corruption has been in the water here since day one. Well, this case back in 1974 became a case when a fellow police officer ratted out the rest, and that led to 20 more arrests of people who were involved in the gambling ring. Well, on to other topics now, as the economy here in Ecorse is really bad, as I've alluded to throughout this video, and as you have probably been able to see with your own eyes. Here you can see the official census counts for Ecorse over the years. Ecorse was doing well for about 40 years there before things fell apart, and then when things did fall apart, they fell apart really fast. The last time that the population in Ecorse has been this low was back in the 1920s. While the latest estimates show that under 8,500 people live in Ecorse today, down nearly 1,000 since 2020. The median household income is $45,000 per year, and only 7% of adults 25 and older hold a bachelor's degree or higher. The median value of owner-occupied housing units is $52,000, and the poverty rate is 25%. On to the crime rates now, and the violent crime rate in Ecorse is a staggering 1,100 for every 100,000 residents, a rate that's nearly 4 times the national average. Not good for a small struggling suburb, not good at all. The property crime rate here is higher than average as well, although it's not nearly as bad as the violent crime rate is. My biggest takeaway from that data set would be the extremely low median home value, which is only at $52,000. There's more to that though, as Ecorse actually has the highest property taxes in all of Michigan. In Michigan, the taxable value is half of the actual value of a home, and this is how much you would pay in property taxes in Ecorse on a home that's worth $100,000.
Damn!
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and guess that the people in Ecorse can't afford that on a median household income of only $45,000 per year. Yeah, that's like 10 used 2006 Chevy Trailblazers that you can buy off of Ecorse police officers.
Bruh.
For comparison, I searched for the lowest property taxes in Michigan, which is in a beautiful part of the state, and it actually surprises me that this area has the lowest. But in Leelanau County, there's the Glen Lake School District, and if you live within that school district, you're paying only $992 on a home that's worth $100,000. So there you go. Well, moving on now to the history of Ecorse, and it's actually one of the oldest communities in all of Michigan. It's considered to be the earliest city actually out of all of the downriver communities, but it didn't come before Detroit. It makes sense due to its geography of being right along the Detroit River and just south of Detroit. Well, the first settlers of Ecorse came from a group of French immigrants under the leadership of Antoine Cadillac in the late 1700s. His expeditions of the U.S. stretched all the way from Canada down south to New Orleans. Before Ecorse was a city, there was Ecorse Township. On this map, north is to the right, west is straight up, south is left, and east is below, where the Detroit River is marked. Early on, logging was the main industry of Ecorse, as it was for many cities in the area when most of the Midwest was forested land. The Detroit River provided easy access to ship off lumber for profit. The first community here was called Grandport, and the name lives on through the Grandport Elementary Academy off of Southfield Road. The village of Grandport was laid out in 1836 with a recorded 800 people, 152 homes, and 4 businesses. It was a central hub for the agriculture and logging activity in the area. Additionally, the first shipyard was constructed here back in 1845. The French culture here early on was really strong, and it's said that most people here spoke French rather than English, which was true for all communities along the Detroit River. The land was then laid out into ribbon farms where there were long and narrow portions of property that were drawn out for landowners so that more people had property that bordered the river. In the case of Ecorse, it wasn't the Detroit River that the ribbon farms were centered off of, rather it was the Rouge River. According to this 1855 map, you can see just how narrow the strips of land were, but also just how long they were. You can also see that there is a sizable area of swampland by the Detroit River shoreline where today's Great Lakes Steel Works is. Over time, people started calling the village Ecorse rather than Grandport, and the name changed to Ecorse officially when it incorporated as a village in 1903, after the name of the township that it was in. The name of Ecorse is French for River of Bark, or Tree Bark River. It was around this time, however, when Ecorse was incorporated as a village, that the community became a shipbuilding hub. In 1902, Great Lakes Engineering Works was established by businessman Anthony Pisano. The shipbuilding company became a giant in the industry, helping Ecorse and neighboring River Rouge grow rapidly with workers who were looking for jobs to provide for their families. The shipyard was built in a boggy area that bordered the Detroit River, that I just showed you on the map earlier, so it wasn't being used at all beforehand. At its peak, Great Lakes Engineering Works employed as many as 2,000 workers. The company built ships for the United States in World Wars I and II. The company built cruise ships as well, along with freight ships. The most notable ship, however, was the Edmund Fitzgerald. The Edmund Fitzgerald is one of the more talked about shipwrecks when it comes to Great Lakes shipwrecks. The ship was built in Ecorse, but it was christened in River Rouge in 1958 before being set off onto the waterways the same year. The ship famously wrecked in Lake Superior during a storm in November 1975. It was on its way from Superior, Wisconsin, heading towards Zug Island to deliver cargo when it came across gale force winds of up to 100 miles per hour. 35-foot waves crashed into the ship along with the whiteout blizzard. The ship ended up snapping in half before sinking 500 feet to the bottom of Lake Superior. The U.S. Coast Guard was unsuccessful in saving any of the 29 men who were on board. Pieces of the ship have been recovered over the years and are on display at various shipwreck-themed museums across Michigan. Of course, Great Lakes Steel Works was established in 1929 while Michigan Steel built the old plant along Mill Street that I showed earlier in 1922. And I've already talked about the history of the steel industry in Ecorse earlier in the video, but it was shipbuilding and steel making that built this town. That's right, no auto plants, despite being a suburb of Detroit, the Motor City. It was also the decline of the shipbuilding and steel industries that made this town fall apart, and the dozen or so corruption cases afterwards didn't help. Neither does having the title of having the most expensive property taxes in the state of Michigan, neither does having a violent crime rate that's nearly 4 times higher than the national average. This is all pretty typical of these Rust Belt cities, though, that relied on manufacturing. This is Ecorse High School, home of the Red Raiders. The school was established in 1932. This wasn't the original building, but from what I could tell, the high school has always been located right here. Well, people, it is now that time. What did we learn in this video? We learned that you can't always trust anyone driving around Ecorse in a 2006 Chevy Trailblazer, and you can't always trust an Ecorse appraiser, but you can always trust Chris's livability score. The first category is education. Ecorse High School does not perform well academically. Only 9% of students are proficient in math, while only 6% are proficient in reading. Education gets a 3 out of 20. And with a violent crime rate that's 4 times the national average, you're going to get a bad score. It gets a 3 out of 20. Downtown is next, and while there isn't really an official downtown, Jefferson Avenue is where all of the downtown-like businesses are located. I like the one small 3-block stretch along the Detroit River, but otherwise, there's not much of an established downtown at all. It gets a 2 out of 20. Economy is next, and the blue-collar jobs that built this town are nearly all gone now. Sure, there's other career opportunities in neighboring suburbs like Dearborn, or in downtown Detroit possibly, or other suburbs that are further north, but I'm not trying to insult anybody. I know that people are going to be offended anyway because it's 2024 and everybody's offended now, but smart people that work at the higher-paying jobs in Metro Detroit don't entertain the idea of living in Ecorse. People who live in Ecorse don't even entertain the idea of staying in Ecorse, with nearly 1,000 people leaving town since 2020. Basically, whoever leaves can. The economy gets a 2 out of 20. Recreation is next, and while the Detroit River does provide some opportunity for those who don't mind fishing in it, I would not want to fish in the Detroit River, at least this close downstream from Zug Island in the Rouge River. Otherwise, there's only a few parks in Ecorse, with the one along the Detroit River being pretty nice, but you would have to drive quite a ways before you get to some of the better recreational amenities that the region has to offer. It gets a 3 out of 20. Next up is history, and that gets a 17 out of 20. Look, I know that today's Ecorse looks like something forgettable to most of you, but industry is what built this country. The Rust Belt region is full of cities like Ecorse that helped produce supplies for the country during World War II. The shipbuilding industry was huge during its era when ships were the fastest way to travel long distance. It's one of the oldest cities in Michigan, so those reasons are why it gets such a high score. Amenities is next, and there aren't really any places to shop at in Ecorse. You'll have to drive towards Allen Park or Dearborn to get to a lot of the things that you might need. Restaurant selections in Ecorse are poor too. At least Wyandotte has a good selection, and it's not too far away. It gets a 3 out of 20. Last up is cost of living, and most people working in this country could afford to buy a home in Ecorse. It's not smart to, though, because of the outrageous property taxes. In case you forgot, a homeowner in Ecorse would owe over $5,000 on a home that's valued to be only $100,000. That's truly absurd when you factor in what an Ecorse resident gets in return, so 17 out of 20 on the cost of living. All in all, the Chris livability score for Ecorse, Michigan is 50 out of 160, putting it in a tie with the South Chicago suburb of Dalton, its corrupt friend, towards the bottom of the list. Well, let me tell you this, if you enjoyed seeing this video, you'll likely enjoy seeing this video here, which is on River Rouge. The two cities are very similar in a lot of ways, and they're both often thought of together among locals when either is mentioned. Also down below, I'll have a link that shows you all of the extra footage that I shot between River Rouge and Ecorse in a separate video on my archive channel. That link will be down below once it's uploaded, so if you want to see more of what this area looks like, go ahead and check that out. Peace.